I'm the Human Rights Monitoring and Advocacy Key Expert of Etkiniz EU program, a relatively new and innovative EU support program only for civil society organizations in Turkey. It provides support for civil society organizations for monitoring compliance of Turkey's obligations towards human rights with the international human rights framework, mainly the United Nations, the Council of Europe, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It strives to build capacity and sustainability for civil society's human rights monitoring initiatives, to improve the quality and quantity of human rights reports to the international human rights systems, like the Council of Europe's Committee on Social Rights. And it strives to equip civil society organizations with expertise. And to do that, we actually work with leading experts of the world in human rights field. And today we are with Aoife Nolan from Nottingham University. She's a member of the Council of Europe's Committee of Social Rights. She's a professor of international human rights law and co-director of the Human Rights Law Center at the University of Nottingham. She has many books, a prize-winning book, for example, on children's social economic rights. And there are other books on her belt, and she had visiting positions at the academic institutions in Europe. And she also co-leads the Children's Rights Group at the Dorothy Street Chambers. Today we are going to talk about, as I told you, children and children's rights and poverty. Well, I actually have to stop here and give the floor to Aoife. Aoife, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much. And I am so sorry that I'm not there in person, because it would be so nice to be there and meeting people. And I'm very conscious that for quite a number of people today, I will be speaking about something, a system, and perhaps a topic that they haven't engaged with in quite this way before. And I am, of course, very happy to have people contact me with regards to follow up, whether through the program that's hosting the event or else directly. I will also, it's obviously lovely to be here. I think a key thing to flag is that at the end of this presentation, I am going to outline resources as well that people can use who want to know more about the system and how to engage with the system in the context of child rights and child poverty, but also the area of social rights more broadly. So I am going to now try to make my screen work, which is always exciting and potentially risky. Here we go. And I trust that that is now, let's get to where it needs to be, from the beginning. Perfect. So today I'm going to speak to you about poverty and child rights. And in doing so, I'm going to focus in on, it says the Council of Europe, but in fact, what I'm going to do is focus in on the work of one particular body within the Council of Europe, the body that really has the most to say and has done the most with regards to addressing the issue of child poverty. And that body is the European Committee of Social Rights. And as you can see, I have all my contact details on the first slide, Twitter, the whole shebang. So there's lots of ways of following up if you so wish. So where are we? So first of all, let's start with the issue of child poverty. Now, for many years, as so many of you will know, child poverty was regarded first and foremost as, a social policy issue, a development issue. And it's really only in the last 20 years that we see child poverty being engaged with properly as a child rights issue. And of course, this approach is not only desirable, it is in fact necessary given that child poverty causes, results from, and constitutes a failure to secure children's rights. If a child lives in poverty, that will necessarily affect, for instance, you know, a whole range of different rights that they should enjoy. It will affect, for instance, their right to survival and development. We will see that child poverty, which a human right under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, for instance. You also have, when I talk about child poverty being a result of child rights violations, we just have to look at a situation in which children are experiencing are not enjoying their right to adequate housing or their right to benefit from social security and are living in child poverty as a result. And finally, what I want to talk to you about in particular today is the idea of child poverty being itself a violation of children's rights. And it's an interesting one because obviously a lot of work has been done around children's rights and its connection to child poverty in the context of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I'm sure that there are many audience members this evening who have done work using that framework or who are familiar with that framework and the work of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. However, one of the messages I'm hoping to get across during the course of this evening is that the European human rights law system, specifically the European Social Charter, provides a really useful framework and mechanism for civil society and other actors working on child poverty from a child rights perspective in Turkey. And I think it's very important that as a background to what I'm going to say to you today, to note that child poverty undoubtedly have a key role in shaping state responses to child poverty in Europe. Okay. And that's very true at any time, but it is particularly true at the moment when we see the combination, not just of the the lingering results of the financial and economic crises that kicked off in the late 2000s, but we now also have COVID-19 and its economic fallout, which is clearly which is already having very severe socioeconomic impacts on children, and indeed is causing a very significant upsurge in poverty in a wide range of countries across the Council of Europe. And what I want to talk about today isn't about children's rights as sticks for government in the sense of going to court or going to a complaints mechanism in particular. Rather, what I want to talk about is how children's rights can be used as a framework for law, for policy, for budget decision-making from the get-go. So children's rights as a proactive framework for combating child poverty rather than a reaction to state failings. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So today, as I've said already, I am going to talk about the European Social Charter system. And the key thing to note is that there are two, unlike the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child system, where you have one treaty, with the European Social Charter system, you have two treaties. And as such, each state that is a party to the European Social Charter system is either a state party to the much older European Social Charter of 1961, or they are a state party to the 1996 revised charter. And what's significant, I think, to know from the perspective of the difference between the two charters is that although the 61 charter contains some social rights, social assistance, social and medical assistance, social security, social and economic protection of the family, for instance, the revised charter contains a much wider range of social rights than the older charter. So if you want to tackle child poverty from a child rights or from a charter rights perspective, you have a significant advantage if the state that you're looking at has volunteered to be bound by the revised charter. And the good news for those of you based in Turkey is that Turkey has volunteered to be bound by the 1996 charter. And so, for instance, you have so we are able to engage with child poverty from the perspective of a much more up-to-date instrument that has far more wide-ranging at least explicitly wide-ranging protections than we see under the older 1961 Charter. There's one thing I need to flag before we move on, and it's another difference between the European Social Charter system and the UN treaty system, for instance. So, when Turkey agreed to be bound by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Turkey essentially signed up to that whole, by ratifying that treaty, Turkey signed up to be bound by every single right under that treaty, okay? Now, with the European Social Charter system, things work slightly differently. And I can already hear people in the background going, not another difference, right? But I think this is a very important thing to grasp in order to understand how the Charter works. So specifically, with the Charter, when you sign up to it, you don't have to accept all the provisions. Rather, there is a minimum number of provisions that you have to sign up to in order to become a state party. And of course, this is often referred to as an a la carte, you know, kind of a picking off the menu approach. And that can be quite problematic if you're trying to engage with a rights issue where your state has signed up to the revised Charter, but it has not accepted the provision that engages with the, for instance, with the rights issue you want to look at. And again, very good news for people based in Turkey. Turkey has accepted the vast majority of provisions, of sections or elements or articles of the revised European Social Charter. So civil society in Turkey has the benefit of having a very strong framework to look at child poverty as a child rights problem that Turkey has agreed to be bound by, okay? Child rights advocates in other countries do not have as strong a framework. So this is an advantage certainly to those of you working in a Turkish context. So what do we see in the revised Charter? What do we see in the revised Charter? Oh, well, before we get there, let me very quickly skim through this. I am a member of the European Committee of Social Rights. We're 15 independent experts. We examine state reports and we adopt soft law conclusions on them. Okay, so soft law conclusions on them. So that will be very familiar to those of you who are engaged, again, with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child system. But we do it differently to the UN Convention. Whereas the UN Committee considers Turkey's report, all of the provisions under the UNCRC and Turkey's performance on those provisions every 4 years or so, we instead, every year, we look at at about a quarter of the provisions. We look at different sections. We look at Turkey every year, but we look at different parts of the Charter in each annual cycle. Okay, this may seem a little bit confusing, but if you click on the link on the screen in the slides that will be shared with you, you'll understand. So, for instance, this year we are looking predominantly at vocational training and labour rights. Last year, we looked at the rights of children, of migrants. The year before that, and in other years, we look at, say, health and social protection. So it really, in order to get a sense of what we are looking at for Turkey in a particular year, you just need to go to our website and look at which cycle we are at, and that will be very clear from the website. The other thing that we do, in addition to considering state reports and adopting these conclusions, which are findings of conformity or non-conformity, is we make decisions on collective complaints. And these are complaints that are brought by a range of different bodies, not individuals, right? So it's not like the European Court of Human Rights system. It's not like the UN Convention system, Convention on the Rights of the Child complaint system. We have a collective complaint system. I am not going to talk about that very much this evening. The reason being that Turkey, while it has volunteered to be bound by the vast majority of provisions under the revised Charter, has not signed up to the complaints mechanism. Okay. Now, this doesn't mean that the decisions from the collective complaint system are irrelevant to your work. There will be stuff there about, you know, what obligations do different rights impose that can flesh out your advocacy at the national level, but you cannot bring a complaint against Turkey under the collective complaint system at the moment. Okay. The other body that I want to mention very briefly is the Committee of Ministers. And just to be aware that the Committee of Ministers has a potentially significant role to play with regards to the European Social Charter system. It looks at state reports, it looks at collective complaints, it looks at my committee's views, it adopts resolutions, and it can make recommendations to states on reports and complaints. In practice, it does so rarely. Okay, the key body for the purposes of you targeting your advocacy in the European Social Charter system is the European Committee of Social Rights. So what I would say is don't worry too much about the Committee of Ministers, which operate more in the background. So what are we talking about? So poverty-related provisions of the European Social Charter. Now, first of all, we have the right of children and young persons to special protection against physical and moral hazards. That can be economic, that can extend its, under Article 7, we deal with issues going from sexual exploitation to digital exploitation to economic exploitation. Children in poverty are obviously at particular risk of that. We have the right to protection of health, the right to social security, the right to social and medical assistance. For disabled children, there are special protections under Article 15, which sets out the right of disabled persons to independent social integration and participation. We have the right to legal, social, legal and economic protection of families, which includes a whole range of different social rights protections. And crucially, and I'll come back to this later, you have the right to social, legal and economic protection of children under Article 17. Okay, so this is a key provision. Article 30 is the right to protection against poverty and social exclusion. Now, let me be clear. There is a reason why, if you're doing work around child poverty and child rights, you want to focus on the European Social Charter system. And that is because if you look at the UN Convention or any of the other UN treaties or any of the other regional human rights treaties that apply to Turkey, you will not find another provision setting out the right to protection against poverty and social exclusion. Right? It is a very significant, important express protection. You can use those other instruments, the UNCRC, to address child poverty issues, but nowhere will you find a right to protection against poverty and social exclusion. And most of what I will talk to you about today and the report that is being produced, I think is being translated at the moment, focused on Article 30 and child poverty, will center on this provision. Two other very important provisions I want to flag from the perspective of child poverty. First of all, the right to housing. Okay, again, Turkey has volunteered to be bound by this. We all know that bad housing is tied very strongly together with child poverty. And it's very interesting that in our work, frequently when we talk about Article 30 and we make a finding of non-conformity with Article 30, when we make a finding of non-conformity with the right to protection against poverty and social exclusion, we are often at the same time, we will make a finding, or relatedly, we will make a finding of non-conformity with regards to the right to housing. That has been a big feature of our work. And finally, crucially, non-discrimination. Okay, there is a provision explicitly dealing with non-discrimination in Article E. And we all know that when you're dealing with child poverty, it is far more evident amongst groups that are socially disadvantaged, socially marginalized, and subject to discrimination. Okay, and so that connection again is very important in our work and when we look at things, look at the issue of child poverty. So let's start with, I'm conscious that I'm dealing with a Turkish audience, right? So you may all be familiar with this, but just in case, I just want to start with a few quick comments about Article 30 and Turkey. So Article 30 in 2009 and 2013, which would have been the last but one and the last, sorry, the last but two and the last but one times that we looked at Article 30, you will see that we actually as a committee were not able to reach a conclusion as to whether Turkey was in conformity or non-conformity with the right to protection from poverty and social exclusion. And the reason for that was that there was not sufficient information in the report. And you will see on the slide in front of you that we make clear that we regarded the absence of information as amounting to a breach of the reporting obligation. Okay, but we didn't make a finding on Article 30 itself. And then finally in 2017, we get a significantly stronger report from Turkey. And I suspect that the government will probably be quite cross that having provided a stronger and more detailed report, were then found in not to be in conformity with Article 30 on the ground that there was no adequate overall and coordinated approach to combating poverty and social exclusion. Okay, so at the moment, Turkey, on the most recent occasion upon which we have considered poverty, and this isn't just child poverty, it's, you know, everyone's right to freedom from poverty and social exclusion, Turkey has been found in non-conformity. So, and as you will see, that was 2017, and the next time that we will be coming to conclusions on Turkey will be in 2021 on that point. Okay, so bear that in mind, right? 2021. So here we go. What does Article 30 require? Okay, it's all very well to talk, you know, about this right to protection from poverty and social exclusion. I mean, first of all, poverty, anyone who works in that area, we all know that child poverty is defined in many different ways. And I think the key thing to note in this situation is that the European Committee conceptualizes poverty in both monetary and multidimensional terms. And I'm going to come back to the multidimensional issue in a minute. And I'll come back to the monetary issue in a minute. But the key thing to note is that we don't have one narrow conception of poverty. We very clearly bring in monetary questions of income, but also other indicators and other dimensions of poverty into consideration when we look as to whether or not a state is in conformity with Article 30. And you will see on the slide in front of you that I said we systematically review poverty-related definitions and measure definitions and measuring methodologies applied at the national level. Okay, the reason being that if you're using a flawed or problematic or exclusionary definition of poverty, you're obviously not capturing the data you need for the purposes of giving effect to Article 30. And I think very significantly, we're quite clear that assessments concerning Article 30 must be based on a human rights-based approach. And in this case, if you're talking about child poverty, we would expect our work to be based on a child rights-based approach, but we are also obviously interested in seeing and would welcome a situation where a state would itself be adopting a child rights-based approach to addressing child poverty. There are states that do this. You can tell me afterwards if you feel that Turkey is doing this, but it's something certainly that we view very positively. And that, of course, is consistent with the broad move we see in work around human rights and poverty internationally to bring a human rights-based approach to bear on efforts to combat poverty. Now, I just want to flag one thing, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about today has been about poverty, but you'll remember that Article 30 is the right to protection against poverty and social exclusion. Okay, and so I think it's very important to note that social exclusion is understood as involving obstacles to inclusion and citizen participation. Okay, so it's not just about material disadvantage. It's not just about how much money you have in your pocket or your living circumstances. It's also about your level of engagement or inclusion within the society in which you live. And we have looked extensively at issues of civil and political participation as an issue when it comes to Article 30. So for instance, dealing with Roma people's access to identity documentation, dealing with the right to vote of gens de voyage, of traveling people in France. So it's not just about poverty being about your living circumstances, it's also about inclusion in the society that you live in. And the very important thing is we require from states very much that it is not just about looking at, socioeconomic marginality. You also have to look at civil marginality. And that is about your ability to engage in civic participation. And crucially, it's not enough. We have said it is not enough to have a situation in which in which states are, you know, removing legal obstacles. You know, they let people vote. It's actually about states proactively engaging in empowerment of socially marginalized groups. Okay, so it in itself, social inclusion and social exclusion are very, very important in terms of what we're doing. And I noticed that in the slide, I have rather brilliantly written social exclusion, but in fact, it should be social inclusion. Though obviously, if you don't have social inclusion, you have social exclusion. Here we are now. So those are some of the key outlines, but what do we want states to do? Okay, so first of all, you will remember that I said Turkey in 2017 was found not to be in conformity with Article 30 because the committee felt that there was not an overall and coordinated approach. Okay, and that's crucial. Let me go back to the language of Turkey. An overall and coordinated approach to combating poverty and social exclusion. But what do we mean by that, right? I mean, first of all, we required that there would be an analytical framework. Okay, so that means there has to be an overall framework or grand plan for addressing poverty, and of course, child poverty. The second thing we want to see is a very clear set of priorities, and these priorities are obviously should be driven by need, and obviously would require, you know, a focus on vulnerable groups, taking into account considerations of discrimination, equality, disadvantage, etc. And also it means states have to identify what are the primary measures that must be taken and then the secondary measures. A key other element is the need to have measures to prevent and remove obstacles to access to fundamental social rights. Now, what this means, this is a reflection of the fact that poverty is very tightly linked with the enjoyment of a wide range of social rights. Okay, I've already talked about how the committee frequently has made findings. When we've made findings of, you know, non-conformity with Article 30, we've also, in the same context, national situation or collective complaint, made findings of non-compliance with the right to adequate housing, for instance. And so what we need to see here is we want to see a situation where we want states taking measures to remove obstacles to access to things like employment or housing or education or training or social and medical assistance, right? And we want to ensure that the state takes measures to strengthen access to social rights and ensure the monitoring and the enforcement of those rights. So it's very much, it is Article 30 as part of the Charter, conceptually, if you see what I mean. It's poverty as embedded within general social rights realization. Okay. Crucially, we said that you have to have monitoring mechanisms involving all relevant actors, including, crucially, groups and persons, civil society and persons affected by poverty and exclusion. It is not about the state simply saying, well, this is what's going on, here's the data we have. It is very clear that states have to make clear, they have to demonstrate that they have involved all relevant actors in monitoring the poverty situation. And finally, and not surprisingly, given that poverty is so often related to income or lack of access to services, to programs, to support or to assistance, you have to have adequate resources. And by adequate resources, we mean that resources have to be allocated to attain the objectives of the strategy. Okay, so you can't just have a lovely framework and set of priorities. You have to allocate sufficient resources to support your overall and coordinated approach. And those resources have to be adequate in terms not just of quantity, but also in terms of quality. And they have to, and how do we define adequacy? Well, if they're adequate, that means that they have to be adequate to the nature and extent of poverty and social exclusion in the country concerned. Okay, so it's very much, you will see that we expect states to have a strong awareness, right? A strong awareness when it comes to giving effect to addressing, to assessing and to addressing poverty in their own national context. It's not just a comparative exercise. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning at this point, and I'm conscious of time and I don't want to speak for much longer, is that I want us to talk a little bit more about what Article 30 requires. We have, as a committee, developed a set of indicators to assess the effectiveness of states' policies, their measures, their actions, within the framework of this overall and coordinated approach. Okay, so first of all, we look at the level of resources. And in particular, we're always delighted to see any increase in the level of resources that have been allocated to attain the objectives of the anti-poverty strategy. Okay, so we look literally about whether the resources that have gone into tackling poverty have gone up or down since the last set of conclusions. We then look at the at-risk of poverty threshold rate. Okay, now this is very much, I said earlier that we do look at income, and the way we look at income is that we use the at-risk of poverty threshold rate, which, we understand to correspond to the percentage of people living under the at-risk of poverty threshold set at 60% of equivalized median income. Okay, so we look specifically at the figures in terms of the amount of support that is available to people and whether it meets this target. And the other thing that we will look at is at poverty rates before and after social transfers. Okay, we take that into account also. And finally, coming back to the fact that poverty is multidimensional, coming back to the fact that we view tackling poverty as being very much embedded in a kind of cross-charter approach that generally increases access and enjoyment of social rights. You'll also note that it's not just about income and level of resources. We also take into account the national measures or practices which fall within the scope of other elements of the Charter under other provisions. And so what does that mean, right? I understand I have the language there, but it's a little bit abstract. So let's just quickly look at what that means. Forgive the horrific slide, okay? You don't need to read this in any detail. The key thing to note is that this is from 2017. It's the conclusions on Turkey in Article 30. And when we were making our finding of nonconformity, we referred to our conclusions of nonconformity under other provisions of the Charter, okay? And we're not saying, oh, because there were these violations, there's a violation of Article 30. It is more that we are making the connection. It's not necessarily a direct causative relationship, but there is a clear linkage between societies and where you don't enjoy these social rights and ones in which you have poverty. So for instance, as you can see in Turkey, we made findings with regards to the right to social nonconformity with regards to elements of the right to social security, the level of the right to social assistance, various elements of labour rights, the rights of disabled people, family benefits under the right to social, legal and economic protection, the right to housing, a whole range. So you can see that when we looked at Turkey and we looked at the issue of Article 30 and poverty and social exclusion, we also made the connection between non-conformity in terms of that right and other provisions of the Charter. Now, there's one final thing I want to mention before I finish, and this is child poverty and the social, legal and economic protection of the child. Now while Article 30 deals with child poverty, we, in our conclusions in 2019, which came out in March of this year, because obviously we can't publish our conclusions until the year is finished, we focused on Article 17, which is the child's right to social, legal and economic protection. And you can see here that in Article 17, we are very much taking the approach that addressing child poverty is crucial if you're going to guarantee the right to social, legal and economic protection of the child. And we say that the prevalence of child poverty is an important indicator of the effectiveness of state efforts to ensure the right of children and young persons to legal, social and economic protection. And so in the Turkish instance, in the context of Turkey's report in 2019 under Article 17, we noted from Eurostat data that 48.7% of children in Turkey were at risk of poverty or social exclusion, and that was a very high rate. And the committee reserved its position on the conformity of the situation with Article 17. Now, obviously, when we look at this again in our 2023 conclusions, it will be useful to have data, and we can talk about that a bit more in a minute, that demonstrates whether in fact or not that finding next time should be of conformity or non-conformity, okay? And the committee, you will see with regards to Turkey, and if you're thinking of inputting to the committee asked the next report to provide information on rates of child poverty as well as on the measures adopted to address child poverty. And we asked in particular on information to be provided on measures focusing on discrimination against specifically vulnerable groups. So if you work in a group, civil society organization in Turkey, and you have information on this that you feel is useful, take a look at the resources at the end of this PowerPoint slide and see if there's a way that you can get that information to us. Okay, there's no guarantee we'll take it on board, that's at our discretion, but it is well worth sending it on. This is a key opportunity for civil society to input. Finally, I want to flag that there are some challenges with using the European Social Charter. Okay, and first of all, historically, frankly, the European Committee we haven't looked in great depth at child poverty, right? There's a reason why I was asked to write that report in 2019 focused on child poverty. But this is changing. So I feel that in a way, there will be the tools necessary from the committee to tackle child poverty moving forward. However, much more importantly, and I think this is more of a challenge, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, the bigger problem is the low profile of the European Social Charter system generally, including in Turkey, as well as the fact that there is a lack of awareness of the usefulness of the Social Charter as a framework for challenging child poverty. As I said, Turkey isn't a party to the additional protocol and collective complaints, and historically we've had very low levels of engagement from Turkish NGOs and trade unions in the reporting procedure. And I'll just leave it there by emphasizing that all of this can change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aoife. This was a brilliant summary of what child rights and poverty means within the European Social Charter system. And I actually made some notes, and before going into that, I just want to flag one important information from Turkey. 1 in 4 children suffers from material poverty in Turkey, according to Başlattı University Center for Economic and Social Research Center. It means that, yes, it is a huge amount of, because we're actually talking about 23 million children in Turkey. So it's a huge population when we talk about 1 in 4 children. But you also flagged that one other important information, that almost 50% of children are at risk of poverty, at risk of actually getting into poverty. So this is huge, and I suppose that's why we are delighted to have you in this webinar, because we would like to show civil society organizations in Turkey that there are other human rights monitoring systems, human rights systems that actually we can ask for accountability from the government. So you talk about the importance that Turkey is signed up to this framework, and this framework, economic, social, cultural, economic, social rights framework of the Charter is very varied, and especially Article 30, it is the probably it's the only human rights provision against poverty in the world that is within a human rights standard. So civil society organizations should use this framework in shaping their advocacy and also in using this system. And there are also right to housing and children's rights in Article 17, as you flagged out. And you also talked about marginality, because when people talk about marginality here in Turkey, for example, with respect to poverty in children or with respect to poverty in general, we're actually talking about social and economic marginality. So it is as important as talk about civil marginality and civic participation, because it's not only human rights, but it's also one of the tenets of a democratic society, I guess. Shall we just thank everyone and let's say we're going to continue with these expert webinars, and it looks as though that you also we're going to share your presentation, and people who are interested in your work can reach out to you through Twitter and via email, I suppose.
Yes. What I would say is, if it's about procedural things, I'm quite likely to send them onto the secretariat, but if people want to reach out, that's completely fine. And it was clear also, Adam, I thought it was very attractive, the idea that you would serve as kind of a key focus point with regards to work around the Charter. I think it makes sense if people are getting on top of a new system, not to give you a gatekeeping role, because that would be highly problematic, and if people would prefer, go through us, but the idea that you would support that work would be absolutely fantastic, as you were suggesting. So marvelous. But do be in touch with me directly, you know, be in touch with Adem, and he can, you know, be in touch with me, but be in touch.
Yes, indeed. Also be in touch with the committee through its secretariat, which is quite open and supportive of the work of civil society organizations. And as Etkiniz EU program, we are actually here to support civil society organizations in Turkey, and we would be delighted to have civil society organizations approaching us asking for support. And these support could include experts. This support could include publication of publications, printing of publications, printing of reports, preparation of reports, online or offline advocacy activities. We are supporting many things, and I hope soon we are going to be, I mean, this COVID nightmare is over, and once we have that, we will also provide support to civil society organizations to go to Strasbourg or to Geneva to meet up with committees as well, the committees like yours as well. So we're here as Etkiniz, and we're ready to support you. And that's, I suppose, all for tonight. I am wishing you a wonderful evening, the remaining of the evening, and have a good night. Have a good evening.